Welcome to this special episode of the EdTech podcast. Today's conversation is a little different. Across the Middle East, many of us have found ourselves navigating an unexpected period of uncertainty and conflict. Schools have shifted online, leaders are making rapid decisions, teachers are supporting students while managing their own concerns, and families are trying to create stability at home. And many of us are simply taking each day as it comes. In this episode, we've brought together a range of voices from across the region, leaders in safeguarding inclusion, pastoral care, digital strategy, and school leadership. Each brings a different lens, but all share a common purpose, supporting school communities through complex moments. This is not an episode about reacting to headlines, it's about creating steadiness. It's about how we protect mental health for students, staff, and for families. It's about the structures that help function when things feel uncertain. And it's about community, because none of us should be navigating this alone. We don't know how long this period will last, but we do know that schools are places of care, connection, and continuity. Even online, that remains true. Our hope is that this conversation offers practical tactics, calm perspective, and reassurance, helping you to focus on what you can control over the coming days and weeks. If you're leading, teaching, supporting, or parenting right now, this episode is for you. Let's begin. Hi, Dr. Catherine. Welcome to the EdTech podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. Would you be able to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are?
Hi, Philippa. Good morning. And it's really nice to be with you, even if we are in strange and slightly troubling times. Um, as you said, my name is Catherine. I'm one of the founders of a socially certified organisation here in the UAE called Inclusion. And we work with families of children with special educational needs to help them gain access to education in the workforce. We provide learning support assistance for families to help them access schooling and to support them in their educational journeys.
Thank you so much. And so obviously we're here today to try and really support schools across the Middle East and actually further afield as well. I was thinking only this morning about the fact that actually we can take some really amazing practice, unfortunately, from an awful lot of countries at the moment. But as we've been thrown into remote learning, we hope for a few days, but we don't know. We're just trying to get some practical advice from those who are on the ground with families and schools. What would your advice to anyone who's within the Middle East at the moment and trying to navigate this situation?
So I was thinking maybe a little practical insight into what actually happens in the brain during times of trauma. I'm a psychologist, so it's always interesting to go to the science, and an understanding of what's actually happening inside your head will help you to deal and cope with the stresses that you're experiencing in your body and your mind. So if we think about during a time of trauma, your brain shifts essentially from thinking to survival mode. And if you're in a high stress, high fear situation like we experienced last night as we were just chatting, here in Abu Dhabi, we had really, really loud explosions happening at about 2:30, and I think everybody heard it. Our windows were shaking. And if this is the first time that you've experienced that kind of event, it can be really quite scary and quite traumatizing. So during that time, you essentially shift from prefrontal cortex activity, and you have a reduction of up to 40% of functioning power in your cortex. Everything shifts in the brain, from how you process information to how your memory is stored, your sleep, everything. So there's a little area that sits on top of the brain called the hippocampus, which essentially means the water horse or S-shaped horse. So it's the kind of like your CPU, your central processing unit. And studies show that during trauma, this actually becomes way less effective. This is like the area of the brain that controls your response to incoming stimuli, both limbic and executive function. And the reduction in activity in this area during those times of stress, it's really significant. So you might find that you're actually not able to respond properly. You might be confused. You might maybe get mixed up with things, forget what you're doing, forget what's been happening. It's really common to have a lot of confusion, and you get quite flooded with cortisol as well. And when cortisol hits, you have short periods of high function, but then the drop afterwards, it's just like a sugar drop. You get really tired, quite immobile, and it can be really debilitating. And over long periods of time, that can really affect you. Now, hopefully for us, this will be a short experience. We're hoping just a few days, but if it does go on in the long term, it's really important to understand what the impact of that would be on your body. One of the big areas is your sleep architecture is totally changed. Now, for us, our sleep was damaged last night because we were woken up by blasts. But over a few days, you'll find that you might be waking up continuously throughout the night, and heightened sense of fear or nervousness or anxiety would be completely compounded when you're tired, when you don't have enough sleep. So if you can, maybe try to catch up on sleep during the day, grab a nap where you can, or just be mindful that those feelings might be partly because you're tired. Make sure that you're really well nutrition. You've got really good nutrition as well, because that, of course, will be a major player on how your body responds, and it's quality nutrition. Don't snack, don't get those big sugar highs, because the sugar lows will impact on how your body is responding as well. Um, if you feel that your heart rating is really increasing during times like when we can hear the explosions in the sky, it can be quite nerve wracking. Be mindful of your heart rate. Maybe check if you've got a device, check on your device. What is your heart rate? Try some calming methods like deep breathing. Nose pinching is a handy one because it distracts your body from the thought process to actually physically doing something. Or squeezing on the earlobes can stimulate some neural calming response. Or if you squeeze just in between your thumb and your forefinger, that area on your hand can cause your brain to relax a little bit and reduce that cortisol overload. I think working with kids, it's really, really important to talk to them about what's happening. Be very honest, even with very young kids, telling them what's happening in the region, what's happening globally, explaining to them what they're hearing. Try not to cover things up, because kids will know, and they'll probably be seeing it and hearing it from friends anyway. So explain to them in a reasonable way, and maybe using tools like Widget to explain pictorially, social stories. UHQ have really amazing resources and tools for supporting people in terms of their well-being and understanding their feelings and explaining and expressing their feelings. So I think if we're mindful of the actual processes in the brain and how that reflects in the body, it will help us to cope a lot more.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think some of those little practical tips are going to be really useful for people to be able to pass on to students and also to parents as well. I think when you were talking then, I was thinking very much around a lot of the work that I've done on the teenage brain. And I think that's a really important insight that you've just shared there as well, that not only do our little ones and ourselves, but actually with the different changes and things that are happening within our teenagers and the teenage brain, that this is another effect that will really kind of throw them up in the air and kind of really disrupt. And perhaps we will see some behavior outbursts or changes or reluctance, and that's okay. I think it's one of those things that we have to, and I say this is probably as a parent as well as an educator, but sort of give them that processing time and not react as if it's a behavioral issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the more that kids can understand what's happening on the inside, and what I'm talking about, like, okay, I'm using quite technical terminology in terms of hippocampus and cortisol and things like that, but we can explain that in really child friendly terminology for younger kids. But teenagers will be fully cognizant of how to process that information. And they're very capable of understanding what's happening. And a lot of them are seeing all of this on social media anyway. I think every teenager pretty much in the region knows all about dopamine and serotonin and all of that. So just giving them that detailed understanding of what exactly is happening, what hormones, what neurotransmitters are flowing around in the brain, and what they do to the body in terms of the physical expression, what it feels like if you're feeling a bit panicky. Is it a panic attack, or is it perhaps a stress response rather than a full blown panic attack? And helping them to understand the differences between those, because understanding that difference can really reduce the effect of the impact of what they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. That has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your insights and your support here today, Dr. Catherine. It has been really helpful. I know you mentioned UHQ there as well, and I would just like to say that I did note that they have offered services for free during this time. So I'm sure if people reach out to John and Jez at UHQ, that they will be more than happy to support.
Yeah.
Um, on that note, I would also just caveat that with be really, really careful with how many different things we are signing up to at this point in time. Whereas there are some really great things out there, we do not want to put ourselves at any risk of overexerting, having additions that will then overload us as well and maybe cause even more stress and potentially could also cause harm in terms of the information that we're giving out at this point in time. But there are some brilliant people out there, aren't there?
Yeah.
And hopefully
There are.
we'll be able to link everything into the show notes that Dr. Catherine has spoken about today. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you so much for doing this because it will be a great support for the community.
Thank you. Hello and welcome, Anil, to the EdTech podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. And at
Thank you,
such
Philippa.
short notice, it is an interesting time for us all. Please, would you be able to introduce yourself to our international listeners and tell us where you are at the moment?
So my name's Tim. I'm the head of digital learning at Thinkrest.
What has happened and what is the situation currently? I mean, I guess in terms of the pedagogical side, we've just heard from Dr. Catherine Farrell about the cognitive side and how we can support learners, but actually there is this whole element here, isn't there, of needing to, well, being told we are online learning. So what does that look like and how can we potentially support others?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how it's coming at this time where the media is talking a lot about screen time and and devices. I think that's very pertinent. I think the thing that we have to be careful about at the moment is just over relying on this technology and making it, as it would be in school. Let's spend every minute on our computers doing our lessons. I don't think that's not the right approach, definitely. But also making sure that there's a presence and just making sure that teachers are checking in with students. I know that we have a policy where we check in the first 5, 10 minutes with the students. We're not going straight into the work and saying, "Where's your homework? Where's this?" It's more about everyone doing questions. A lot of our teachers in primary school use a lot of different techniques to sort of, utilize the fact that their children are at home. I know one teacher uses this guess who's wearing socks game that she plays. It's just a little bit easier, or show me your dog, because you couldn't do that in school. So it sort of changes the whole element and makes everyone kind of realize, oh, there's some benefits of being at home because you can play these things and you can speak about certain things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely something to be said for reassuring, but actually that connection as well. So for those schools who maybe have pulled away from doing any lessons online or having any contact, do you see that as being a real benefit for the students and the community where you are?
I think because of the fact that we have, different protocols where there are sirens, and there are points where you need to just make sure you're safe, it does make live teaching quite difficult. And I think the resource that we have here that we've learned from COVID is recording our lessons, creating these asynchronous um, sessions that students can dip into whenever they need to as well. And it really gives those teachers the control to utilize that technology the way that they need to, which is, let me share my screen, let me model this, let me annotate on things, let me just utilize this moment where I can edit and create the perfect 5, 10 minutes for you. And I think that's probably the key thing to do. If you're not doing live teaching, creating those resources is really valuable, I think.
That's brilliant. And I think you're right, is that flexibility to be able to be there if you need to be with certain students or even groups of students, but actually having that time to say, this is what I want you to learn. This is how I'm going to share that with you. And you have the opportunity to do it in your own time. Again, thinking about what Dr. Catherine was saying was around our sleep being incredibly disrupted, that ability to be able to go, actually, I've got a bit of time right now where I need to just switch off. I need to have that family time. I need to have that opportunity to go and do something else that's going to take my mind off this. I think that's really important, that flexibility, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think also, basing on the fact that it's also Ramadan, so that disruption of sleep is already there. It's not the easiest time for a lot of children as well. But I think what we need to remember is that there's this comfort for children in this kind of routine stability that we create. So having those routines in place. So for example, doing something in your lessons or your recordings where it's structured so they know what to expect. And maybe everyone's doing the exact same thing, so it feels like it's part of what they do in school. I know I've spoken to some colleagues about, utilizing things like Padlet and Kahoot because that's what they do in their lessons already, and like bringing that familiarity into their lessons to kind of make it feel, as normal as possible. But also, like you've just said, being a bit more flexible and saying, right, I'm not going to expect you to be, ready to learn as you would normally do at, at 9:30 for my lesson. But here is a lesson for you, and I'm going to have a check-in at this time to make sure that, you've made an attempt, and if you've got any questions, here's how we can work on it together. I think that probably works a bit better for children in this situation, especially depending on if they've got internet or if they haven't, or if something's happened to their device, which can happen as well because they haven't got any technical supports. Their microphone might not be working, or their camera's not working. Who knows? But they haven't
Mm.
got any way of fixing that.
Yeah. And I think as well, that's a really good point. It's really easy to assume that within, especially when you think about the Emirates, we have very affluent families. We also do have lots of families who don't have a device each, who don't have everything under their, under one roof, that they can do that and they are sharing. And we do still have that requirement to be mindful of that side of things also.
And then, on top of that, the average, family is maybe 5 children. One parent sometimes having to balance that, and 5 Google Meets or whatever that might be, isn't easy to manage. So, thinking about how we could be a bit more flexible for parents to allow them to say, look, I can do that with my kid at 1 o'clock, but I need to be with these two at this time so they can create their own schedule. And thinking
Yeah.
about what can you share with parents to help them to navigate that a bit easier as well.
Yeah, that's really important. Exactly as you say, because we do have large families here, but also we've got families that are working. So even as a single parent, like a single child family, sorry, it may well be that there is limited support and things there as well, because ultimately we have been all advised to work from home, but that doesn't necessarily mean that work has stopped. And so again, shorter hours due to Ramadan have been supportive, I guess, to that narrative. But also there's a lot of other kind of scenarios going on there. I just want to curve back to, you mentioned around platforms they're used to. I think that's really important. Um, already, and I know it's coming from a place of support, but we are seeing a lot of companies say, come and use our platform for free. Come and do this. What would you say to educators out there at this point in time when they're looking at those sort of situations, thinking that looks like a really great opportunity?
I think it's tricky because I think you can get caught up in that and you can say, oh, yeah, we need that right now. So it doesn't matter what it is, we need it because we have to get through the situation. However, when you think about staff and you think about children, I think familiar is always safer for them. And sticking with the things that you have in place usually is all you need. You don't need to, add anything else to your ecosystem already. Because once you get out of this, which you will do, you're going to be stuck with this thing that you've now got staff on board with, and you don't know how to manage that, and that might end up being something which you no longer want. But it's also taking those teachers away from what they should be focusing on, which is the well-being of those children and what they're teaching, not this new product that they've got to learn now. So keeping things simple. For example, when we were looking at creating lessons, I mean, we've got so many things that we could do with the tools that we had with Google. Even Canva. Canva is great for creating, recorded lessons as well. There's a limit of 25 minutes, unfortunately, but that's something which they could use. Teachers, we look back at what teachers were used to during COVID, and we have a lot of teachers who are still here from COVID, and that at that time was Loom. So thinking about rather what is more familiar and what will they feel at ease with, we had to go with something which we know that they would just slip right back into as well. I think that's probably the best thing to think about as well, not extending things just for the sake of it, and really thinking about what can you use with what you've got already.
Yeah. What are your crisis tools that you can go to that everybody knows already? And then what are your day-to-day tools? I think that's really
Yeah,
important. Keep
simplify everything as much as you can, for
Yeah.
sure.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us today, Anil, and for sharing your insights into the current situation and also what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to add just one thing because I think this is a time where my colleague John and I, we are very much into cybersecurity. We've been doing that for quite a while now, and I would say just on his behalf, because John's not here, um, this is the time that I think a lot of teachers need to be careful with because cyber attackers will take advantage of widespread news of regions having attacks, and they will take advantage of the fact that you're not really paying attention. And I'd say one of the biggest threats at the moment is because everyone out there is probably getting their information from social media, and most cases it's Instagram. So one of the attacks that I've seen recently is people sending very, very clean, legit emails about your Instagram password. And I would just say it's really hard to detect, but there is one way that I can give you as a little quick tip to figure this out. So if you have Instagram and you've received an email that says your password has changed, or we've sent you a message, can you please click on this link? Rather than you thinking, yep, it's fine, you can actually go to your Instagram, go back to your settings in your Instagram. And when you go into your Instagram settings, there's a password section, and you can look at the emails sent to you from Instagram in Instagram. And if there are no emails or record of emails sent from Instagram, that means that that's not from them. And then therefore you need to make sure you ignore that or report that to your school so that everyone knows that that's a potential phishing email as well.
That is so helpful, Anil. Honestly, I would have no idea that that was something that you could do, and frequently get messages throughout. I was quite shocked, honestly, on Saturday morning when all of this began, at how quickly I did receive an email, not an Instagram one, but a different email, which was pretending to be from the government. And I thought, wow, swooping in immediately, and people have no shame. They're doing it to try and trick people who are at a point in time where they're at their most vulnerable. And I think this is the other part around not trying to bring new things into your school's ecosystem. I know personally, I would advise all schools to make sure that their teachers are really clearly logging in with their own system emails, not logging in with personal emails, not sharing information to any third party that hasn't been approved by the school for exactly those reasons. Unfortunately, and especially across the GCC, we have so many private schools, don't we, where we're holding as much information as hospitals do. We are absolutely targeted for cybersecurity and crimes, and we just need to be very, very aware. It's better to tell the system that Anil's email was phishing spam and report it, even if it wasn't, just in case. I think if you're worried, it's
Just in
always
case.
better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
Um, but thank you for that. That's really great. A really lovely piece of advice. And we'll try and link the information and instructions into the show notes as well. So thank you so much. It was
Thank
great
you
to
so
have you.
much.
Thank you, Anil. Bye.
Likewise. Thank you so much. See you later. Bye bye.
Welcome to the EdTech podcast, Ivan. It is lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time in such uncertain times. Would you please be able to introduce yourself to our international audience?
Yes, certainly. My name is Ivan. I have been teaching since 1997, so that's insane in some ways. And have been in the world of IT pretty much from the get-go. I trained as a geography teacher, but went into IT very, very quickly, and have been ever since. And have been trying most of my life in education to get teachers to use technology effectively in the classroom. That's where I've been going. First 20 years I was in Cornwall, and then I hit the international circuit. So I've been in Spain, China, Italy, Oman, bounced back to the UK briefly. We don't need to go into that too much. And then I'm now I'm now in Qatar, and I've only been here for 2 months, so it's all been a little bit crazy in the last couple of months. But yeah, it's that's what I do, tech and education.
Fantastic. And you really do have a wealth of knowledge around that. So it's really great to have you on today. And obviously 2 months in Qatar, such a short amount of time, but also a kind of system in terms of the way that, you were in Oman. You're very used to this idea of remote learning and the expectations. How is everything in Qatar, and what has your school done in terms of response?
Yeah, well, obviously, when you're living in the environment, it all depends where you are as well. So, depending on your geographical location in Qatar, it changes your perspective. We've been really lucky where our apartment is that we have had little visual impact or sound impact, etc. What's happening. My personal experience is very different from people who are living a lot closer to the airbase, where they have a lot more reminders of what's actually happening. So that plays a little bit of an impact on on the well-being of staff and what actually happens in your day-to-day life. And then obviously the school I'm at, Newton, they have a wealth of very, very young teachers who come through. So for them, this is like their first international rodeo, as it was, and then suddenly to find themselves either with a couple of colleagues in an apartment or by themselves and suddenly working online and transitioning so rapidly with everything else that's going on around them must be and is quite impactful on their well-being and what we're trying to do. We've been really lucky. Our principal Patrick has put well-being front and center. Obviously international schools have that sort of desire to meet their clientele's needs, which is to get so they're up and running very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. But at the same time, when it's this sort of like a shock and a drastic change, which is slightly different from COVID, um, well-being should be paramount. So although we have plans in place to make us as able to teach online as possible, his remit has been look after yourself first. Everyone has their own lived experience. Everyone is being impacted in their own separate ways, depending on their situation, and always to reach out to leadership, have those conversations first and foremost, which is really enlightening and quite a good way to do it. I think from a school's perspective and from a leadership's perspective is to look after your staff. They're the ones who are trying to do this at the front line, as it were, within this educational online environment.
And that's such a positive way to go about it. As you'll know, as an international father and teacher, you're also balancing the act of having your own children at home with you. And as will many of the teachers as well. And so that ability for leadership to say, make sure that you are safe and well and feel psychologically secure as well is really important, is quite refreshing and is really supportive. Um, what what have what has the ask been of staff then in terms of supporting, as you mentioned, the clientele? Like we do have, for those listeners who are not aware, within the Middle Eastern market, when you are an expatriate, you go to a private school and you pay. And so that can oftentimes potentially muddy the water in terms of expectations around what's delivered and that sort of service to people, whilst also remembering that we're all in the same sort of situation. So has there been an expectation? Has there been any reflection from COVID in terms of what to do in this sense? Because it is a very different scenario.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what they said was that there is no real expectation apart from to try and get online and make sure there is something meaningful for the students to actually engage with. I think the end goal would be to have live lessons, and some of us are delivering live lessons. So to have because equipment is an issue for starters. Not everyone's got a laptop at home. Not everyone has access to everything they need. Their internet might not be as good. So those are concerns. So it's a build up to the fact that we could potentially all be live, but we are asked to share resources, be online, even if it's just text based, so we can answer questions, etc., and just be a point of contact for the students and give them the work they need to do, which is what you should do, I think, because teachers are, they're very proud people and they don't want to look bad online. You're beaming suddenly into someone's house and you still want to be able to do your job professionally. So you don't want to rush this because then you cause another level of anxiety because it's like, have I got this right? Am I doing this right? Who's watching this lesson? It's not just your class. It's you don't know who it is. You don't know who's behind the screen. So that's really, really important as well from our perspectives. Yeah, it's do the best you can. As leaders, I'm the head of IT at our school, so I'm just constantly just chatting with my team and just saying, have you thought about doing this? And we can do this, and just let me know. And that's how we can be. We just support everyone else. It's like a big family online is what we're trying to achieve, that goal.
Which is lovely. I love that kind of ethos of just being a community, which again is so similar across the Middle East. That's very oftentimes what we find, isn't it? You mentioned head of IT there, and I think something we briefly touched upon with our conversation with Anil just before this one is things like cybersecurity and safety. What sorts of things, not necessarily that you've seen personally, but that we should as a community be aware of as schools? What sorts of things could we highlight to other educators listening or leaders of things that you really do need to take note of during this sort of time?
I think that's really interesting because every school has a different setup. So we're sort of quite lucky in the sense that we have the Google environment for our school. So first and foremost, everything we do is driven through that environment so that we know who is dialing into our classes, who we're communicating with, and it's a closed environment which gives us that level of protection. And then the other issue, not necessarily cybersecurity, but it's just the internet in general. Actually having the bandwidth to be able to do this, I suddenly noticed a massive drop in connectivity, especially with your cameras on, etc., because your whole country's suddenly gone online. And everyone is going online to find out what's happening in the news, etc., etc. And that probably not so cybersecurity, but just like awareness of what is the real news and what isn't the real news, and that spreading of fake news and that spreading of like misinformation, which generates another layer of like panic or anxiety is really important. But just making sure that you know who you're talking to, you're connecting safely, you are interacting safely with your students is really important. And those conversations you have with them is mainly about the topic of the subject, trying to give them some sort of level of security and normality.
Yeah, and normality is so vital right now, isn't it? And I think that's really interesting. You bring up things like social media as well. I think it's also really important to be aware that because of the amount of time we're online, and actually, interestingly, Anil brought this up earlier of screen time, of actually kind of making sure that we are being quite balanced as ourselves and individuals, and trying as hard as possible not to dive into scrolling too much and kind of absorbing too much of that information that potentially, as you say, could be misinformation or be fake news.
Yeah, and I've got a 7-year-old son who has not stopped asking questions. It's all the time question, 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 question about the whole event. So that's another thing you have to manage within your environment, depending on whether you've got children with you or not, is protecting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've all got lots of different things to be considering, but it's brilliant to have so many different roles within schools to be able to kind of manage and share the balance and that information and support to others, right? To be able to have a wealth of different experiences as well, to be able to support each other. Thank you so much for being with us today, Ivan. It's been so helpful, and we hope that you are very safe today in Qatar as your school and all of your community. And thank you for taking the time.
Nice, Philip. I appreciate it, and I hope you are safe in Abu Dhabi as well. I hope it's going as well as can be expected anyway in this time.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, and welcome, Clemmy, to the EdTech podcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. It is a real pleasure to have you. Would you please be able to introduce yourself to our international listeners and tell them where you are right now?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Clemmy. I'm an educational advisor and I'm based out here in Riyadh in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Amazing. And so in Saudi right now, obviously across the GCC, we've seen an awful lot of turbulence. Most schools are remote. I know that things in Saudi increased just recently as well. How is everybody, and what's kind of what's happening at the moment? What's the narrative?
Sure. So, if you'd asked me this 24 hours ago, I'd say it's all very calm, and we're really unaware of anything happening beyond what we're seeing on the news. That did change overnight. Obviously, the US embassy was attacked, and they were successful in getting some drones down, unfortunately. So, I think people are a little bit more concerned this morning. They're more aware. A lot more schools have closed and moved to online provision, but there are also still some schools open. And I think schools are making those decisions based on their proximity to certain things in the kingdom, and also the guidance they're getting from the Ministry of Education and their own boards.
Yeah, which is obviously everything that we should be doing, listening very closely to what's real. I think that's really important. We've discussed that with a couple of previous conversations we've had this morning around making sure we're looking at reputable sources. It's very easy to draw ourselves into a doom scroll of information and different things. And I know lots of people are getting messages from all over the world, which is, again, a different narrative. So that is really, really important. And I guess it's very unknown. So we're talking very, in some ways, hypothetically in terms of how long this might go on. But what is your advice? You work with so many schools. What's your advice to people? What is your advice to leaders and to teachers within the region at the moment?
I think my advice to leaders is to be pragmatic, to act quickly, and to make sure they're fully prepared. I know that when there was the last tension escalation in region, when I was still at the school I was leading at the time, we sat down and put together a whole load of plans around what we would do if there was a situation with a missile, what we would do if there was something happening in the local area, tied in with what embassies were advising, what the Foreign Office were advising. And I think it's really key to have those plans, but then to also keep them updated, keep refreshing them, keep reviewing them, because anything can happen. We learned that with COVID. We know that with regional escalations and all sorts of different things that you don't know are coming. You've got to be prepared. But plans are only useful if you keep revisiting them. And if I was in a school now, I think I'd be revisiting those plans every 24 hours to make sure they're still accurate, they're still appropriate, and they're still fitting the context that we're in. I think if I was a teacher, I would be speaking really openly and honestly with my leadership team about what I can manage and what I'm struggling with. Teachers are also mums and dads and sisters and brothers, and they have families and lives outside of school. And we've got to make sure that those all fit together comfortably, particularly if this turns into a long-term situation. So yes, online lessons are helpful, but do we need a full day online? Or actually, can we take some learnings from COVID and not have break time online and lunchtime online, but actually give children and teachers the chance to switch off, do something different? And I think for families, that open and honest communication is also really important with schools, managing the expectations of what they can do at home, but also what they're just going to let go of, because right now that's not the priority.
No, absolutely. And I think that is the thing, isn't it? It's those, first of all, plans of like, what is your strategy here? Because as we know, yes, strategy can be thrown out of the window in terms of if things really do change, but at least you're starting on solid ground. So it's really, really important. But as you say, to reflect upon that, I know some of the advice being given today as well is to not, go for all these kind of other things that you could add into it. It's not necessarily about adding. It's, as you say, what do we need? What's vital? Where are the connection points? Where can we check in and make sure that people are safe and well? Um, in terms of supporting then, so obviously we have communities and things as well around that. And as you say, families and teachers, well, teachers have their own families at home and things. What sorts of things have you seen that's kind of good practice, or what would you be saying to people proactively, like this is a really good thing to be able to do to support, or we saw really great value from doing this in a different scenario?
Sure. I mean, something I saw just yesterday, actually, I think it was in the UAE, is the ministry have set up a mental health helpline, which I just think is such a brilliant idea, because not only does it give something pragmatic for citizens and residents to use, it's also making it absolutely okay to say, I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm concerned, and this is what I can do about it. And I think any way of promoting that positive approach to mental health will be really, really beneficial. So obviously you can't control what a country does in terms of that, but in terms of your school community saying it's fine to be scared, it's fine to be worried, these are different ways that we can support each other, lines for mental health support, counselling, coaching. Julie Keys, who I think is an absolutely brilliant voice in the space of coaching in Dubai, put up a lovely post on LinkedIn the other day and Instagram saying, I'm here, I've got flexibility if anyone just wants to talk. And I think that kind of approach to being open and honest about how we're feeling is really, really helpful. I think also planning what we're going to say to the children is critically important. And I can think of various different times when I've led schools in London, in Riyadh, where we've had to give difficult messaging, or we've had to talk about something scary that's happening. planning with the team what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, how we're going to give children ownership of big feelings, that it's absolutely fine and normal to have these big feelings, but also then rationalizing them against, this is what the evidence is showing us, this is how likely things are that are happening, and here are all the different people who are keeping you safe. So I think having those open communication lines are critically important. And then finally, sharing resources. There are some amazing educators and leaders out online at the moment sharing their resources openly, just collating those and getting them out to people so that everyone can be supporting where they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've seen lots of people doing that online, which has been brilliant. And I think going back to the mental health part as well, what I feel like I've seen a difference in terms of that support is there's an awful lot of information around how to talk to children, how to deal with those things and not to close down on those. So I think that's a really great call out for that, because it's definitely been a turn that I've seen from, if I compare COVID or even down to things like um closures of schools that have been happening, as you say, because of different conflicts and things within the region previously in the last 12 months. And that feels like something that has been pre-thought, pre-organized and there, because we can see that that is a big part of the effect of this, right?
Definitely. And I think look at places who already do this really, really well. So I was reading over the weekend before, a lot of this kicked off, the Leading Your International School magazine. And there was a brilliant piece in there about the British school in Ukraine and how they have kept learning online, but also open schools and everything they've put in place for these phenomenal children and teachers. They've been quietly getting on with it for years now. And I think, not that I'm suggesting we all start ringing them up for advice because they're probably quite busy themselves, but just looking at what did they do so successfully to navigate that school community and how can we learn from that if this is going to be a protracted conflict in the Middle East?
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently was working with a school in Lebanon who've been doing this in exactly the same way for quite some time now. And it is about managing so many different stakeholders, but in such a way that there is so much communication that it becomes, we're in this together, we're supported, but we carry on because we have to carry on. And actually, weirdly, as I was driving this morning, I had to go and get my dog's stitches taken out. So normal life is resuming, thankfully,
It is.
somehow. And it did occur to me that I was thinking about the Ukraine and I thought, well, actually, they're almost like when we were in COVID and reflecting towards China and Singapore and places like that, Hong Kong, where we were reaching out to find out, well, how have they dealt with this? What have been significant issues? Where have we found there to be real pockets of success and how can we support our communities? And I think that's really a really valuable piece as well to potentially, as you say, not bombard them, but maybe
Yeah.
go and look and see what we can find out about them.
Yeah.
Because they have been dealing with it for such a long time now.
They have. And education communities are notoriously brilliant at sharing resources because ultimately we're all in the business of children. And therefore, we want to support our children, love our children, nurture our children, and care for them. So, if we can share best practice around, the things that unite us are certainly bigger than the things that divide us. And it's times like this where we can really pull together and look after all of our children.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is such a brilliant way to end this. Thank you so much for your help and support today and for telling us a little bit about what's happening in your part of the region. Stay safe, Clemmy, and please, lots of love to everybody. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Hi, and welcome, Julia Knight, to the EdTech podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Would you please be able to tell our international listeners and audience who you are and where you are at the moment?
Hi, Philippa. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure, as always, to be in your company. My name is Julia Knight, and I do a range of different jobs, but I'm currently working as a school improvement advisor for a school in Bahrain, where I'm helping with teaching and learning, leading the safeguarding and pastoral teams, and just a whole mixed bag of, work in education, which I absolutely love.
And that is phenomenal, but also in terms of where we are right now within a very uncertain time, an awful lot of different elements to be looking after and a lot of different stakeholders to be able to support there. At the moment, with what you're seeing, how are those conversations unfolding? What sorts of things are really important for us to be very mindful of at this time?
I think the first thing we need to be really clear about is how hard this is on the teachers who have that 90% timetable, who are delivering online lessons in very challenging times. Here in Bahrain, we have had alerts through our mobile phones. And as you can imagine, being an online lesson, when an alert goes off, the alert is really terrifying. We're a K-12 school, so we go all the way from nursery through to grade 12. So the range and age of students obviously has an impact on how we are delivering the learning online, but also the safeguarding aspect, which is really where I have been focused the last couple of days. And it's a real delicate balance for staff. It's a real delicate balance for parents. How much do you tell a child? What do you tell a child? But equally for the teachers who are delivering the learning, how do you recognise what a safeguarding concern is in an online lesson?
And that's exactly the concern and the frustration, isn't it? Is that when we're in person, we can see body signals, we can understand different emotions that we might not have seen. We can see where the different changes in children are, and in adults as well. And as soon as we go online, sometimes cameras go off. We don't see those emotions. We don't see that from that person any longer. And then how do we identify? So what is the advice there? What are you telling teachers and staff to be more mindful of, or how do we address that?
I think one of the things that we have in our toolkit is the lessons from COVID. So having cameras on is essential for every student, so that we can actually monitor what is happening in the background. When we have had alerts, teachers have reported that children have become distressed, or they've rushed to the windows to see what's happening. That was a particular class of grade 4 boys. So we are really thinking about what lessons can we take from COVID, and then how can we transpose those lessons that we've learned into what we're dealing with now. And actually what we're dealing with now is much more along the kind of psychological weight of the current issues, and they manifest in so many different ways. So we've asked our teachers to be vigilant for siren anxiety, hypervigilance, for example, constantly looking around, because the sound and the sirens, they are triggering distress, and you can sometimes see the children freezing during calls. And it's really about how you then, what do you do in that situation? Do you stop the lesson or do you carry on? And those are the questions. And again, it has to go down to that lesson, to that individual setting and how we deal with it. With particular students who are really stressed, we've contacted the parents immediately and said, look, so and so is not coping. He can come off the call until we're able to bring him back in, for example. But you're dealing with such a range of ages, as I said before. How do you put a whole school message out when actually a 3-year-old is going to respond entirely different to a 13-year-old? So we've tried to sort of look at some of the different signs that they might exhibit. So things like, being distracted, restless, or, having sudden emotional outbursts. And really just allowing those teachers to sit with those children and talk through what's happening. So, how are you feeling? And just letting them talk, because they will have been around adult conversations. They will have heard the sirens going off. They would have heard the explosions that have happened overhead. I mean, we had one this morning at 4:40, and I know the times because we get the alerts on our phones. So it wakes you up, and the whole house shook. And having to deal with that during a lesson, which thankfully during the daytime it hasn't been so bad, but we're all on high alert for those quiet periods because you're instantly thinking, what's going to happen next? Is it coming? Is it not coming? And for children, that can be really disturbing to their usual routine. Um, the biggest side effect I think we've seen is the absolute exhaustion in staff and students. When you're being woken up multiple times in the evening and during the night, we had one at 1:30 this morning, one at 4:40. You are not sleeping. You're not going back into a deep, restful sleep. So we've made our lessons shorter. We've made sure that staff are able to call it if it's too much for the class they're teaching. And also, like I said, come away from the learning. If you feel that actually what you're doing is pointless, don't keep going on. Just try and, redirect it, have a conversation. You take certain children offline, whatever it might be, but really asking staff to use their discretion. And not being afraid to know what they don't know and to reach out if they have any concerns.
Yeah, and I think that's such incredible advice that also really differentiates it from a lot of conversations online at the moment around actioning wet play or COVID related plans, because whilst we can share good practice and we can take elements that really worked from that and lessons learnt, we are also needing to be much more mindful that there is going to be a whole different effect and a whole different element to this. We were talking to Dr. Catherine O'Farrell at the beginning of this podcast, where she was talking about the psychology of that and actually the importance of understanding what it does to the brain. And that's really beautifully matched with what you've now given us some really great examples in terms of how to be able to deal with that. I think it's really important for that to be taken on board as a very different scenario. Whilst we can always take best practice, we do need as leaders to go, but this isn't the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm really, and this is a lesson I've learned over the last few years, is that the communities in which we serve are all unique. Every single school that I've worked in may have had, tables and chairs in a room and a projector and a teacher, but actually what happens inside of those rooms is incredibly unique. And my current school is 97% Bahraini. So we are not going to be dealing with the same issues that an international school that has a different percentage of expatriates versus local students. So there's no leaving the country. There's no getting away from what this is for our students. Whereas in other international schools, there will be talk of, well, we're going to get, repatriated, or this is, the government are going to take us home, or whatever it might be. So really remembering that your context is completely unique to you. And even down to the nuances of, well, they're all Bahraini. Yes, they might be, but they might come from different parts of the religious sects that there are in the region. They may have Iranian ancestry. There might be, just a whole different dynamic for every single school. And, unfortunately, there is a wave of anti-American, sentiment, and it is building. Then how do you manage that for your American students? We've got an American school here in Bahrain, or American curriculum schools. We've got several. So having that context and being really mindful of the community that you serve and really drilling down into what makes it unique and how you can attach your advice, your support, and tailor it to their needs is so, so important at this time.
I think that's so key. Talk often around strategies needing to be very different for everybody. It's great to see what other people are doing, but you always have to make sure that it fits with your scenario and your demographic and your locality, because otherwise it won't work. There will always be nuances that just aren't relevant to you. I just want to say a huge thank you. That was so insightful and so helpful. I think as an educator myself, if I'd been in the classroom still, that would have been really reassuring and supportive. So thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Very welcome, Philippa. But I would just also like to add, if anybody does want to reach out on LinkedIn, if they do require any support around safeguarding, crisis management, I'm more than happy that, as it says, the DMs are open.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we will link to the show notes to make sure that everyone has contacts for you to be able to get in touch. Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Julia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Louise, and welcome to the EdTech podcast. It is a joy to have you here, although under not so joyous circumstances, but we are really excited to hear from you. I'd love you to be able to introduce yourselves to our international listeners, please, and tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be included. My name is Louise Dawson, otherwise known on social media as Louise Inclusion. And I'm an inclusion specialist, having worked in the Middle East for 14, 15 years, but in education for 25 years and business for around 20 years. I'm now self-employed, working in the region, supporting families and schools and ed tech companies to all come together, working inclusion, making sure that everyone joins together to do the best for our children. So thanks very much for inviting me.
No worries. And that's exactly what the EdTech podcast is all about. It's about being able to share those stories and support people to be using it in the right way. And in no terms is this kind of the best part for that, really, in terms of what we're looking at right now and the need for education technology, but also the disruptive nature in terms of why we've had to go potentially remote or what we're looking at. And so it'd be really great from your perspective, working with so many different people across the region. What are you advising? What are you hearing? What would you share as some of those things that you think, if you do nothing else, try to do this?
Sure. So I think we can go off in many different tangents, right? But for me, inclusion is all about how systems respond when they're under pressure. And I really feel that situations like this, it takes us right back. This isn't COVID. This is a very different feeling, but it does take us back to those feelings of needing to shelter, needing to stay home, but needing to be safe. And we know that when we have to do that and take shelter, which is what we're calling it now, vulnerable groups are those groups that come to the forefront. But actually, in situations like this, I feel like everyone is vulnerable. And I think that's what I'm feeling back from the community is the fluctuating emotions of the stress, the response, and how we're responding to those around us. And I'm seeing a lot of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. I'm doing a lot of flopping myself. And I feel like when I'm talking to people, I'm bearing in mind something that I've learned through my training, which is the 3 H's, which is hug, help, or hear. So when someone is messaging me and saying, Louise, have you got a minute? I'm very conscious of do these people want me to hug them or hear them or to help them? Because when somebody's dysregulated, the worst thing you can do is try to help them if they're not actually wanting help, they just want to express. So the whole hug, hear, help thing in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop thing is definitely something that I'm seeing and using as a way of managing my own emotions in order to give, putting my own mask on first in order to give the best support. And I think that education, we are the anchor of the community, and we felt it before 6 years ago. We're feeling it again. We are the anchor. Time and time again, educators step up and support the community in a way that nobody else is able to do. We are in people's homes again. We are directly working with children. We are in our own homes with our own families and juggling it. We are the anchor. We weren't thanked before. We probably won't get thanked again. It is unrecognised, but I do think within the education sector, we need to recognise and thank each other for the work that we're doing and the worksheets that are being made and the social stories that are being created. We have put a brilliant one out this morning in dual language. The work that people like yourselves are doing. We're all here and we're all doing our bit, but our community is just incredible. So some of the things I think when we talk about students of determination and educators, I think we need to pause often. Okay, stop. Stop is one of the best. If you don't know what to do nothing. Simplify everything that you're doing, everything that you are delivering. Make sure that you've got stability in your routines. Protecting that cognitive overload. What we're seeing, and I posted about it on LinkedIn yesterday, is actually, we're all quite dysregulated, and what is helping us is routines. We have to reduce the amount of pressure we're putting on our memories because half of our brain is listening out for sirens, for signals, for sounds overhead, for potential evacuation. Half of our brain is on alert, and that is reducing our ability to use our memory. We need to have that one consistent place for communication. So if you are leading a school, making sure that all information is going out on one channel because our staff can't manage multiple channels and our parents can't manage. They've also got their own channels for work and business. So making sure that we have one place for communications. I think I'm seeing a lot around exam pressure and students not knowing if they're going to be taking their exams. How are they managing their revision? They have a whole added layer of exams, but reminding them that we have been here before. If we need to put in safeguards, we will. If we can put in, different styles of examination. If it comes down to teacher marking and teacher grading, we can do that. We've done it before, and we will protect our children and their future, without a shadow of a doubt. And then when it comes to protecting children, I do feel like we always need to have an eye on that safeguarding. So we are looking at what are our children watching online? What are they hearing? What are they seeing? Who are they communicating with? So, sitting with your child or, even though we're teachers, we still have our own children. but asking, what are you seeing? Being very explicit. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you thinking about? What are you worried about? That whole communication piece. But remember that our children are very vulnerable at these times to being groomed. It's a real thing. I wish I didn't have to talk about it. I wish I didn't have to have it in my life. But our children who are vulnerable, if our parents are working hard and we're not in communication with them as educators, we have the opportunity to lose them to people who will listen and to people who will care and to people who obviously they don't properly listen and they don't properly care, but we do have that risk with our children. So revisit your safeguarding procedures. Are teachers having one-to-one alone access time with the students? And again, 99.9% of teachers would never break safeguarding rules, but it's that 0.00 whatever, we need to be aware of them. And then with our staff and our children, make sure that we encourage that time for disconnecting from technology. I can't tell you how relieved I was at about 9 o'clock to turn off all the tech, plug it all. I actually shut everything down, turned everything off, turned off all my alarms, notifications. I messaged my family and went, I'm now turning off my phone until 6 o'clock tomorrow. If I don't respond, I'm fine. But I am doing that for my own well-being. And I have a private little number for, my own children if they need, or my mom, if they need to contact me. So shutting down, disconnecting from technology. And that feeling at 9 o'clock was very reminiscent of previous times we've had to work from home, but was a very big relief. No news, don't need to know. I will hear the sirens if they go off. I am safe. And I need to be able to put my own mask on before I can support more people tomorrow. And that actually has worked for me today. I feel more regulated today than I have earlier in the week. I think that probably about covers the amount of advice I'm going to give today, because I want to protect everybody's cognitive overload as well.
Absolutely. But I really appreciate the honesty and the important elements in terms of grooming online. It is a real thing. There's many people who very much see being here as in a bubble and maybe think that won't happen to them or won't happen to their children. We're seeing all sorts of things all over the world. And as you say, this is a time where people are taking more advantage of it. It's horrible to think that people will do that, but it's real and we have to accept that and we have to acknowledge that. And I think you're so right. I love the H's. I really can understand how that would really resonate with people. I think that's great advice as well, just to be able to put into perspective of actually what does this person really need from me right now, and you know what, they might need a hug at one point and they might just need to be heard at another point, and that's okay. And I would exactly reiterate what you've just said, that final bit, because I think that's so supportive to everybody. I would say not even just at this point in time, but actually is to turn things off and to not listen. I think there is a risk and danger in us scrolling too long and listening to too much. And even though we know there are reputable sources, it's still easy for us to be drawn into that sort of thing. Being present with our families is so vital. And as you say, that cognitive load, it's really incredible having heard all these different people from all over the Middle East talking about things, but so many different elements have really transcended across the conversations, because we are so in sync. We are such a community and we do just want what's best for everybody. I really appreciate your time today, Louise. Thank you so much for your support. And we will link everything back into show notes as well for people to be able to see resources and to be able to connect with you. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you. And I wish everyone safety.
Hi and welcome. We have Jeffrey Smith here with us on the EdTech podcast today, finishing up our Educators Insights from the Middle East with what is happening right now. Welcome, Jeff. It was so lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Could you tell our audience and listeners a little bit about who you are and where you are right now?
Thank you, Philippa. And before I begin, I just want to thank you and applaud you and congratulate you on pulling this together and pulling the community together. I've known about Eruption for some time. I've read the useful blogs and information that you put out to empower the education community. And I think that this is just very commendable what you're doing here during this time of uncertainty for all of us in the Middle East. And of course, safety is our top priority. I'm just really glad to be a part of this. My name is Jeffrey Smith. I am Managing Director of Copperstone Education. We are a provider of online services for schools throughout the region. We also um, organized a Common Core Boot Camp, which is a 1 day professional development event exclusively or almost exclusively for U.S. curriculum schools in the region.
That is incredible, which is a huge amount. The region has, I mean, over 50% of the schools across the Middle East are US curriculum, right? So that is a massive amount of schools that you look after and support, but also an awful lot of educators who, as you've said, unprecedented times, very much thrown into something that potentially we're not expecting in the slightest. It's generally, I've said for decades now, the safest place in the world to live. So this feels very uncertain for so many people.
Yes.
Um, what sorts of things are you sort of hearing on the ground? What are you being able to support educators with? What sorts of things can you share with the listeners? Because really that's what this is all about, is what are those proactive tips that we can share and support one another with?
Sure, absolutely. And I actually have some tips for schools and also for parents who, there's things that parents can proactively do as well. I sit on the governing board of a school, and it was actually on Saturday morning when we were talking about something completely unrelated that this entire the story started to unfold before us. It's this situation. Um, but for schools, I think the practical things we have to keep in mind now that distance learning is a reality, and it sort of harkens back to the days of COVID. And how do we deal with a learning disruption when we don't know if it's going to be short term or long term? And understand and appreciate the real risk of distance learning. But at the same time, understanding that distance learning itself isn't the problem. It's when distance learning is poorly structured and there's been no planning done in order to make sure that you have clear outcomes, there is accountability, and the parents are empowered with the information that they need. And so for parents, I would just say that academic gaps can grow faster than we realize. So what schools should focus on from our perspective would be um, my number one, I would say it's structure over volume. Don't try to load on a bunch of schoolwork as if their kids are in school. Make sure that there's consistency as far as schedules and weekly schedules. Make sure that you still have clear learning objectives and it's not just activities. Measurable progress needs to be there needs to be a system in place for that, and teacher visibility. I think students need to know that their teachers are still there interacting with them, and this isn't just some login automated situation. So at the end of the day, I would say it's not about screen time. It's really more about learning time and make sure that that time is well spent, both for the social and emotional needs of children and also for learning outcomes. So what should parents do at home? I would say number one is even during this time of crisis, make sure that your children are sticking to a fixed daily routine. It's very, very easy. I know over the weekend, it was very hard to get children to go to bed because they're up watching the news and listening. And of course, there's a lot of anxiety that our children are feeling right now. But you really need to protect those study hours. Try to reduce the distractions in the social media as much as possible. And that's probably good advice for some of us adults as well. and stay in communication with the teachers and don't assume that this distance learning thing is temporary and the children can catch up later. Because we learned during COVID that learning gaps are real and it only takes a week or two for students to really miss out on critical skills that they're going to need to build their foundation for the future. And the last thing I would mention for students, especially in the US curriculum, is that universities are not going to date deadlines because of regional instability in the Middle East. So everything that you had planned, make sure that you continue, especially for the grade and 11 and 12 students. If you're planning to take the SAT in May or June, make sure that you continue to follow through with that, or the ACT, or the AP. And of course, I don't know how long we're going to be out of school, but make sure that you have resources in place to make sure your students are adequately prepared for those exams. Um, University applications are going to continue. So your child is not only competing against children in the region, they're competing against children globally. So we want to make sure that they're prepared. And then the last thing I would like to offer is how do we maintain continuity of education while at the same time managing emotional stability through the academic structure? And I think this is where school leaders have to go above and beyond keeping in contact with their teachers. Some of the embassies are recommending that staff leave the country. So helping them through that thought process, or making sure that you're open to have conversations, and oftentimes just listening and understanding where people's anxiety is coming from and help them manage that in order to reduce it. I think that progress builds confidence, and availability builds confidence. So making sure that you have a structure in place in your schools where you're available, and you're available to, even though we're separated right now, we're isolated again by distance learning, making sure that we're available not only for our students, but also for our teachers and staff. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
do want to just quickly mention where Copperstone sort of fits into all this. We're no strangers to distance learning. This is what we do every day. We have a very well established self study structure that we do in partnership with Ed Options Academy, which is run by Edmentum. And so, if students need to maintain a continuity of education, and this message is for school leaders as well as parents, and you need an alternative just to make sure your children do not fall behind. Um, Again, this is what we do. This is our area of expertise. So we can offer temporary, whether it's for the rest of the semester, or even if there are a few critical courses that you would rather your children do in a self-study environment. We're open to have those conversations with you. We're open to walk you through the process, and make sure that your students have everything that they need. And I think that's particularly important with SAT and ACT prep, because that's one test that your children absolutely have to be well prepared for. And so we're here to help.
I think that's incredible. I really appreciate the focus around structure as well. It was something that was brought up earlier around a few other elements and areas around mental health and supporting that cognitive load. But I think that's really important. It's that for everybody, it's making sure that we have structure in our lives to be able to continue, because we don't know how long it's going to last. I've seen reference to wet play and things like this on social media, and as much as I can understand where that rhetoric is coming from, as you mentioned very clearly, we don't know how long, and we don't know what this is going to look like. And actually, there is a comfort in structure. There is a comfort in having the stability of knowing all those different things. And I really value the fact that you mentioned there about having really clear links. Like, why is my child doing this? I think for myself, even with my 11-year-old at home, his question yesterday was, well, why am I doing this task? And actually it's a lot easier to explain that when you can say, well, look, the teacher has written this, this, and this is the explanation. This is how it links back to the work that you're doing. It's not just a bit part task that's been thrown online for you to just keep busy. It's
Absolutely.
actually work that you would have been doing otherwise. So I think that's really valuable advice. And as you say, there are resources available for people to be able to continue that. Unfortunately, if we compare it to something like COVID, where the whole world was affected,
Mhm.
as you say, these really important tests and examination periods are not going to go away. And so this is really vital. And I really appreciate that support and that input. And I think it's just going to be so helpful for people to hear that way of thinking around it. So thank you so much, Jeff, for
Thank
being here
you.
today on
Thank
the
you. And you're really an inspiration to all of us, Philip. But thank you so much for putting this information out for parents.
That's really kind. Thank you, Jeff. And I'll speak to you very soon. Stay
Thank
safe.
you. Bye bye.
Hello, Deborah, and welcome to the EdTech podcast. It is a joy, as always, to speak to you, although sadly not around the circumstances that we are talking to you at the moment. Would you please be able to introduce yourself to our international audience and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, Philippa. Lovely to be talking to you again, although, as you say, not the best of circumstances. My name is Deborah Forsyth, and I'm CEO of British Schools in the Middle East, BSME.
And we serve and support 184 schools across 11 countries in the Middle East and North Africa region.
So right now, I can imagine there's an awful lot of people reaching out to you. There's a lot of questions being asked and a lot of support needed to be given. And, you know, your team are incredible, but that's an awful lot to be able to deal with and a lot of information to be able to do, to share. Obviously, this whole podcast episode has all been about supporting and sharing and just reassuring people that they're probably on the right tracks and not to worry. But we'd love to hear it from you. You must have so much insight into what's going on across the region and how we can help other people who may not have had that information yet.
Well, BSME for us is very much a community, in good times and in bad. And I think the community comes to the fore, really, in times of crisis. As a community, we have a number of structures that we have set up as part of our everyday work, really. We are an organisation that has an ethos of by members for members. So we have a lot of people that work for us in voluntary roles as country reps within their country or their city or their region. And they have a network of schools and heads or teachers, subject teachers, that they support and work with and share practice with on an everyday basis. So as we go into a situation like this, we're quite lucky that we've already got really well-established networks and groups set up where the communication channels are already really open. And so that means that you're immediately ready to start to answer and support on some of the more tricky questions that are coming through.
Absolutely. And I think it's that network, isn't it? We've heard a lot today from people about the communities that we have here. We very much, especially as expats, but also within the nurturing communities that we live in, are part of these beautiful groups of people who do share and have that sort of supportive culture. What sorts of things at the moment are you advising schools? What sorts of information is being shared?
Well, we're being very, very careful that we don't share anything that we've not personally vetted and we know is absolutely official. And that would probably be one of my first guidances for schools and anybody really is follow official guidance. In these days of rampant social media, there's so much out there. Some of which is correct, some of which isn't, and a lot of which is not actually particularly helpful in helping you as an individual remain calm and centered in the reality of where you are. So definitely following official guidance is what we would recommend. And where there is new guidance out, if we're hearing from KHDA that online learning has been confirmed, we will put that out to our members, knowing that it has been vetted as being official and accurate. So helping them to stay updated with guidance and encouraging them not to try to veer too far off and look at the other stuff that can cloud your picture.
It's wonderful. And in terms of other things that you're able to share across the regions, what sorts of kind of information with your people on the ground, what sorts of communication have they been able to share with their country, with the country leads that you mentioned, those sorts of things? How have people been able to support one another?
In lots of different ways, really. Certainly, well-being, safety, and well-being are obviously top of the agenda at the moment. So guidance, the guidance on what people should be doing. Do we need to be sheltering in place at the moment? Has there been a new announcement to say that that's changed? But also well-being, and I think particularly as the week started and we went into Sunday and Monday and online learning started, thinking very much about the well-being of the students that we're supporting, but also of the staff within our schools as well. And the one obviously has an impact on the other. So we've been able to share quite a lot of material advisories on how to talk to children, how to talk to very young children about what's going on, how to talk to neurodivergent children about what's going on, how to support yourself. So we've had quite a lot of mental health leads within the community, both within the BSME community and within the communities in which we're living, who have put on free webinars. So we've had lots of webinars over the last 24 hours for teachers, for students, for parents, for schools. So being able to share those so people have got access to that. There's a meditation happening tomorrow morning for people for whom that might be useful. So I think being able to support on the wellbeing bit has been quite big, but also we have school leader WhatsApp groups that have been going on, and actually for leaders to be able to say to each other, how are you approaching your online learning? Are you offering live lessons at the moment? Just for them to be able to see what's going on in other schools, what's working, and sharing that good practice. The sharing of good practice and collaborative work is really central to what BSME is, and it really comes into its own during a situation like this.
And that is vital, isn't it? Because oftentimes you can be sat there thinking, well, this might feel right, but maybe what's everyone else doing? And unfortunately, as you've mentioned, social media is so prolific. When we have people saying what they're doing and then maybe that looks bad on someone else, and actually that's not a time for those sorts of conversations to be being had. It's what works well in your scenario and what was right for the people that are in your community. So that must be really reassuring for those leaders to be able to have that network of people to be able to have conversations with. And I guess on that respect, in terms of what you're hearing from that, what is the outlook at the moment? Because it would be probably really reassuring for maybe people who aren't part of that community to know that there is a diverse selection or that people have gone a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment there seems to be predominantly not live learning. I think because it was a very sudden decision, teachers hadn't had a lot of time to plan. Some schools maybe had teachers that were not in place. They'd gone away for the weekend and couldn't get back. Some teachers were at home without their laptop teaching materials and were not supposed to be going out to fetch them from school. So schools had staff in very different circumstances. So live learning, I think, for many was not an avenue they wanted to go down, particularly also with activities ongoing. The live learning didn't look like it was going to be the best solution for most schools. So I think that certainly not everybody, but the general theme at the moment, I think, is that there's being uploaded work and check-ins, that there are periods within the day or within the lesson where teachers check in to give academic support or pastoral support so that students have got that connection. If there's something concerning them, they can talk about that. Obviously, we're only in day 2 or 3, depending on whether you started on Sunday or Monday. But I think as we go into the rest of the week, at the moment, in most countries, online learning has been called maybe till Wednesday. A couple of countries have called it already for the week. I think schools will be looking, particularly with exam classes. If it's going to go on a bit longer, we need to start to think about how we can approach some sort of live teaching, particularly for exam classes. And then if we're going into next week and we're still here, that will become a bigger part of the conversations within schools. But I think the important thing with schools kicking off on Sunday or Monday was, let's get something up there and let's look after student and staff wellbeing, and we'll work our way in. And I think that's where most schools seem to be at the moment.
Yeah, and that is really reassuring, I think, for those schools who haven't been able to go online or perhaps were worried that they should have, but as you've mentioned, for various reasons haven't been able to. I think that is a really reassuring thing to hear that not everybody has, and that's okay. And again, we go back to the idea of it's scenario based. It's what's right for you and your community. Just to wrap up, I know you sort of mentioned that the first thing that you would give as advice, but what are those kind of key pieces? If there's a couple of tips that you would be able to share with people who are listening, what would you say?
Self-care. I say self-care is important, and part of that self-care is follow correct guidance and don't let yourself you can watch the news 24 hours a day or spend all of your time scrolling through all of the things on social media. Try and avoid that. I think try and think about your own well-being, that of your family, and be connected to people. We've certainly within BSME, we know that some teachers will be here and maybe living alone, and we've encouraged schools where that's happening to say connect the teachers that might be living alone. We have a support email. There's a page on the BSME website that members and non-members can go to. We're keen to support anybody in the region. We've certainly been in touch with FOBISIR and COBIS and AOBSO. And if any of their members aren't part of our organisation, we're still happy and keen to support them. So reach out and make sure that you're connecting with someone. Don't let yourself feel isolated in any way. Lean on those networks. Look after yourself and keep in touch with other people, I think would probably be it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And we will link into the show notes all of the people that you've just mentioned there, because for those schools that maybe aren't connected to a network, and as you say, there are free resources, there is support and guidance there. And the most important thing is, as you say, to stay connected and stay positive and build that community where we need to, so we can help everybody as much as possible. Thank you so much, Deborah, for being here today. It's been really helpful and very insightful. And thank you for all the work you're doing across the Middle East.
Thanks, Philippa. Lovely to catch up.
Before we close, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all the leaders who contributed their time and perspective to this conversation, and a thank you to you for listening, for leading, and for supporting your communities during a time which is not an easy period. If this episode was helpful to you, there is a strong chance it could help someone else too, so please do share it with a colleague, a school leader, a pastoral team, or a friend who might need a little structure and reassurance right now. Community matters, and what sometimes simply passing something on is part of how we support one another. Take care and speak soon.